The paramedic was on speakerphone and I could hear my mother's voice cutting through the static from the back of the ambulance. "She's been in an accident," he said. "We're taking her to St. Michael's. She's conscious, but she has a head injury and we need someone there." There was a pause. Then my mother said, "Oh, okay, but we're actually in the middle of something right now. Can her husband go?" My husband, Declan, was 3 provinces away, had a conference in Calgary. I told her that 2 days earlier. She knew. The paramedic looked at me. I must have had some kind of expression on my face because he reached over and turned the speakerphone off and finished the conversation himself. I stared at the ceiling of the ambulance and listened to the siren and thought, "This is fine. Someone will come. Someone will be there when I get there." Nobody came for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I should probably back up. My name is Vivian, and I'm 31 years old, and I work as a civil engineer for a municipal infrastructure firm in Toronto. I'm good at my job. I make a decent salary, not tech money, but comfortable. Enough that when my parents started struggling about 4 years ago after my father had to take early medical leave from his job, I started helping them out. A few hundred here, a car repair there, a month of groceries when things were tight. It felt like the right thing to do. They're my parents. You help your parents. My brother Callum is 26. He still lives at home. He's the baby, and as far back as I can remember, being the baby meant that Callum's problems were always slightly more urgent than mine. More emotional, more deserving of immediate attention. Not because anyone ever said that out loud. Nobody in my family would say that out loud, but because that's how it always played out in practice. The accident happened on a Thursday afternoon in late November. I was driving home from a site visit. It was just starting to snow, and a driver ran a red on Eglinton and clipped the back end of my car hard enough to spin me into the curb. My head hit the window. Not the windshield, the side window. I didn't lose consciousness, but I was dizzy and there was a cut above my ear that was bleeding more than it should have been, and the other driver called 911 before I'd even fully registered what happened. So that's how I ended up in an ambulance at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Thursday, listening to my mother tell a paramedic that they were in the middle of something. The something I found out later was that Callum had just gotten a noise complaint ticket from the city of Toronto, $320, because he'd been playing music too loud in the townhouse backyard during a party he'd thrown without my parents' knowledge. The fine had arrived in the mail that day. He was, according to my mother, completely beside himself, and she and my father were trying to calm him down. That was it. That was the reason. At the hospital, the intake nurse was kind enough to not comment on the fact that I listed Declan as my emergency contact, and then immediately said he was in Calgary and unreachable for at least 4 hours. She got me into a room, got my head cleaned up and examined, and ordered a CT scan because of the location of the impact. The doctor, a tired-looking man named Dr. Osei, said there was a small contusion and they wanted to monitor me overnight. He asked if there was anyone who could sit with me. I said my husband was on his way, which was true. I'd called Declan the moment they got my phone to me, and he was already trying to rebook a flight, but on his way from Calgary meant 4 hours minimum, probably more. So I lay in that room by myself, and I waited. At 5:35 p.m., I texted my mother, "I'm at St. Michael's, room 214. They want to keep me overnight. Head injury." She read it at 5,007. I watched the 2 check marks go blue. She didn't reply until 6:40, and what she sent was, "How are you feeling? Callum is doing better. He was really spiraling earlier, poor thing." I put my phone face down on the blanket and looked at the ceiling for a while. My father called at 7:15, not to ask how I was exactly. The first thing he said was, "Your mother said you have a head thing?" A head thing. I'd been in a car accident and had a CT scan and was being monitored overnight for a brain contusion, and he called it a head thing. I told him the doctor wanted me to stay overnight, and he said, "Well, that seems like a lot for a bump. Are you sure they're not just being overly cautious?" I said I didn't know, Dad. He said Callum had calmed down, but he was worried the fine would go on his record. I said I had to go. The nurse was coming. The nurse was not coming. I just needed to stop talking. Declan landed at 10:48 p.m. He was at the hospital by 11:30. When he walked into that room and saw me, the bandage, the IV they'd put in, the monitors, I watched his face do something I'd never quite seen it do before. He sat down next to me and took my hand and didn't say anything for about a minute. Then he said, "Your parents aren't here." It wasn't a question. "Callum got a fine," I said. Declan looked at me for a long moment. He's not a man who says things he doesn't mean, so he didn't say anything then. He just kept holding my hand. The next morning, my mother called while the doctor was doing rounds. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message saying she hoped I was okay and that they'd try to pop by later if Callum was feeling up to it. They did not pop by. I was discharged at 2 p.m. and Declan drove me home. My parents never came to the hospital at all. A week later, my mother asked if I could do the monthly e-transfer. I want to be honest here. I did it. I sent the money. I know. I spent a lot of time since then trying to explain to myself why I did it. I think it was habit, partly, and partly some exhausted hope that if I kept doing what I'd always done, the thing that had just happened would somehow mean less, like I could just absorb it and keep going. The monthly amount was 650 tithes. It had started as $200 2 years earlier, then crept up. A bit more when my dad's medication costs increased. A bit more when the car needed repairs. A bit more when Callum needed help with a college application fee. And then, later, with his first month's rent somewhere he never actually moved into. The 652 was just what it had become. I'd stopped questioning it. Declan didn't say anything when he saw the transfer notification on our shared account. He had a policy of not directly criticizing my family to me unless I asked, which I respected and also sometimes found maddening. But I could feel him not saying something, which was almost worse. 2 months after the accident, my parents came for dinner. It was the first time I'd seen them in person since before the hospital. My mother brought a focaccia from the bakery near their house and kissed me on the cheek and said I looked well. My father shook Declan's hand and asked how the Calgary trip had gone. There was no acknowledgement of the hospital. No apology. No, we're sorry we weren't there. It was as if it hadn't happened. As if the ambulance and the CT scan and me lying in a room alone for 6 hours was just a minor administrative detail that we'd all collectively decided to move past. I set the focaccia on the counter and went to check on something in the oven that didn't need checking on, and I stood there for a minute with my back to the room. Our daughter, Ren, she's 4, came running in from the living room right at that moment and grabbed my leg and said, "Mama, Grandma said she brought you bread and I want some." And I looked down at her and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. "You can have some with dinner," I told her. She considered this. "Is it the good bread?" "It's the good bread." "Okay," she said, and ran back to the living room. I took a breath and followed her. The dinner was fine. Conversation was fine. Callum's noise ticket apparently wasn't going on his record after all. My mother mentioned this with visible relief, like she was sharing good news she thought we'd also be happy about. Declan looked at his plate. I nodded and said that was good to hear. After they left, Declan did the dishes and I put Ren to bed, and when I came back downstairs, he was standing at the sink, not really doing anything, just standing there. "You know we need to talk about the money," he said. "I know." "Not tonight," he said, "but soon." "I know," I said again. We had the conversation 3 days later, a Sunday morning when Ren was at her grandparents'. Declan's parents, who had, when they heard about the accident secondhand through Declan's sister, called me immediately and sent flowers and offered to come to Toronto if I needed anything. I thought about that a lot in the weeks after, the contrast of it. Declan laid out the numbers on the kitchen table, not accusingly. That's not who he is, just practically. The 650 $10 a month over 2 years, the one-time transfers, the car repair, the time I'd paid for a plumber at my parents' house because my father said they couldn't afford it and I'd charged it to our joint credit card. The total, laid out in front of me, was more than I'd consciously registered. Not ruinous, but real. "I'm not saying stop," he said. "I'm saying Is this what you want to be doing? Is this the relationship you want to have with them? I sat with that for a while. The thing is, my whole life, I'd believed that if I was just good enough, responsible enough, generous enough, present enough, my family would eventually see me the way I needed them to. That the scoreboard would balance. That there would be some moment where my mother would say, "I don't know what we'd do without you," and mean it in the way I needed her to mean it. Not as a transaction, not as a lead up to asking for something. I'd been waiting for that moment since I was probably 16 years old. I was 31 now. I'd been in a hospital room alone with a head injury, and my mother had texted me about Callum's noise ticket, and I was still sending 650 towels a month, and I was still waiting. I stopped the transfers in March. I didn't make an announcement about it. I just didn't send the money. My mother texted on the 15th, "Hey, did you forget the e-transfer?" And I wrote back, "I've been thinking about it and I need to take a break from that for a while. I'll explain more when we talk." She called me 4 times in the next 2 days. I let 3 of them go to voicemail. The 4th I picked up. She said she didn't understand, that they were counting on that money, that I knew how tight things were. I said I knew. I said I was sorry that things were tight, but that I'd been doing this for 2 years and I needed to step back. She said, "This is about the hospital, isn't it?" Not as a question. I said yes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Vivienne, we were in a crisis with your brother." "I know," I said. "So was I." Silence. "That's not fair," she said. "A noise complaint is not the same as a car accident." "You're right," I said. "It's not." She hung up. Or, it's possible the call dropped, but I don't think it dropped. My father called 2 days later. His approach was different, less emotional, more logical, which had always been his preferred method with me because he knew I responded to logic. He talked about the medication costs. He talked about fixed income and inflation, and how hard things were for people their age. All of it was true. I didn't argue with any of it. I said, "Dad, I need you to hear me say that I was alone in a hospital for almost 7 hours and nobody came." He said, "We've been through this." I said, "No, we haven't. You've never actually acknowledged it." Another silence. "What do you want me to say?" he finally asked. "I want you to say you're sorry," I said. "That's all. That's the whole thing." He said he'd have to talk to me later. He didn't call back. Callum texted me in April. He wanted to know if something was going on with me and Mom and Dad because they seemed stressed. I wrote back that yes, we were working through some things. He sent back a thumbs up emoji, and that was the entirety of his engagement with the situation. Declan's firm had their annual fundraising gala in May, a dinner at a hotel downtown, the kind of event where people get awards and make speeches and generally feel good about themselves. Declan had been nominated for a professional recognition award that year, which was genuinely exciting, and we'd been looking forward to it for months. His parents came down from Kingston for it. They got a hotel room and took us to brunch the morning before. And Declan's mother kept saying she was so proud of him, and I kept thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what family is supposed to feel like. I wore a green dress I bought specifically for the night. Ren told me I looked like a tree, but a beautiful tree, which I chose to take as a compliment. The dinner was beautiful. Declan won his award. He gave a short speech. He's not someone who loves public speaking, so he practiced it at home 3 times, and I'd timed him. And when he thanked me at the end, I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Clean proud. The uncomplicated kind. We were at the after-reception, drinks in hand, when my phone buzzed. My mother. I almost didn't answer. I was in a hotel ballroom. Declan was 10 feet away laughing with a colleague. The night had been genuinely good. But something made me step out to the hallway and pick up. "Vivienne," she said, and her voice had that particular tight quality that meant she'd been working herself up to something. "I need to talk to you about what's been happening." "Mom, tonight isn't. I need you to understand what you've done to this family by cutting us off. Do you know how much stress your father has been under? Do you know that he had to go back to the doctor because his blood pressure? Mom! And Callum had to help us with groceries this month, which is humiliating for your father. Mom, stop. She stopped. I stood in the carpeted hotel hallway in my green dress and I thought about the ambulance. I thought about the CT scan. I thought about 5007 p.m. and 2 blue check marks and a text about Callum spiraling. I was in a hospital, I said. I was alone for almost 7 hours. And when I texted you, you responded to tell me Callum was doing better. Silence. You have never once apologized for that, I said. Not once. I asked Dad directly and he changed the subject. You've never said the words. I thought we were moving on, she said. You were moving on, I said. I was just watching you do it. I heard her take a breath. I waited. Vivian, I don't know why you're doing this to us. And that was the sentence. That was the one. I'd heard variations of it my whole life. I don't know why you're so sensitive. I don't know why you make everything so difficult. I don't know why you can't just let things go. And something about hearing it in a hotel hallway while I was wearing my green dress on a night that was supposed to be good, something about it just clarified things. I'm not doing anything to you, I said. I'm telling you what happened to me. Those are different things. You're punishing us. I stopped sending money, I said. That's not punishment. That's just me not doing something anymore. Silence. I love you, Mom, I said. And I meant it. That's the part that's hard to explain to people. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was just tired. But I need to go. Declan just got an award and his parents are here and I want to go back inside. I hung up. I stood in the hallway for another minute, just breathing. Then I went to the bathroom and touched up my lipstick and went back inside. Declan found me by the bar a few minutes later. He handed me a fresh glass of wine and looked at my face. Everything okay? My mother called. He was quiet for a second. Are you okay? I thought about it. Actually thought about it. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. His mother found me later in the evening near the dessert table. She's a small woman, retired teacher, has a way of saying things very directly without it feeling unkind. She'd met my parents twice, I think. She knew the general outline of things. She squeezed my arm and said, You looked wonderful up there when Declan thanked you, like you belonged exactly where you were. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, but I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. It's been almost 8 months since the gala. My mother and I have spoken 4 times since then. Stilted, careful conversations where we both stay in very shallow water. My father and I had one actual conversation in August where he finally, after I asked him point blank for the 3rd time, said, I'm sorry we weren't at the hospital. We should have been there. It wasn't effusive. It wasn't the scene from a movie. But it was real, and it was his, and I'm choosing to count it. Callum texted me in September to say he'd gotten a part-time job and was contributing to the household, which he seemed to want credit for, and I told him I was glad to hear it. I'm not sending the money anymore. I don't know if that's permanent. I don't know what permanent looks like when it comes to your own parents. What I do know is that I feel, for the first time in years, like I'm standing on ground that's actually mine. Like I stopped pouring water into a hole and started paying attention to what I actually had. Ren asked me the other day, out of nowhere, while I was making her lunch. She asks things out of nowhere. It's one of my favorite things about her. She asked me, Mama, do you always have to share? I thought she meant her snacks, so I started to say something about sharing being kind. But she was looking out the window, not at me. And I don't think she was talking about snacks at all. No, I said, not always. She nodded very seriously, like this was the answer she'd been hoping for. I think about that ambulance sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. The way the paramedic turned the speakerphone off so I wouldn't have to keep listening to my mother's voice. The small mercies that strangers give you. The way the ceiling of an ambulance looks at 4017 on a November afternoon when you are 31 years old and waiting for someone who isn't going to come. I think about it, And then I think about Declan's hand in mine at 11:30 p.m. I think about Ren at the end of the bed the next morning when Declan brought her in before school and how she looked at me very seriously and said, "Mama, your head has a bandage." I told her yes. She said, "Does it hurt?" I said, "A little." She said, "I'll kiss it better." And she did, very gently. And then she ran out to get her backpack. I think about that too. The scorecard I kept in my head for 15 years. The one where I tracked everything I gave and everything I didn't get back. I've been trying to let go of that. Not because the things on it weren't real. They were real. But because carrying it was making me someone I didn't want to be. And a life that, when I actually looked at it, had a lot of good in it. More than I'd been letting myself see. My mother called last week. We talked for about 20 minutes. She asked about Ren. I told her about Ren's obsession with a particular brand of dinosaur crackers, and she laughed, genuinely, and for a few minutes it was almost like it used to be before I understood the full shape of things. Almost, but not quite. The shape has changed now. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just what it is to grow up, finally, in your 30s, in a hospital room with a head injury and nobody there, to look at the ceiling and decide that this is the last time, that you're done waiting for people who are not coming. Some doors don't close all at once. They just stop opening as wide. I used to think that if I was patient enough, generous enough, quietly reliable enough, the people I loved would eventually meet me where I was. That's not naivety, exactly. It's something more like a calculated bet you make when you're young and still believe that effort always gets returned in kind. I kept making that bet for 15 years. I kept losing it. And the strange thing is, it took lying alone in a hospital room with a bandage on my head to finally understand why. What happened to me wasn't a single bad decision on my parents' part. It was the end result of a long pattern of choices made, again and again, that said one child's comfort mattered more than another's crisis. Callum's noise ticket was $320. My CT scan was for a brain contusion. Those two things were weighed against each other, and the ticket won. That doesn't happen by accident. That's a value system built slowly, brick by brick, over decades. And I had been funding it, literally, with $650 a month, while telling myself it would eventually balance out. It never balances out. That's the thing I had to sit with. Not with bitterness, but with honesty. The scorecard I kept in my head wasn't a path to fairness. It was just a way of delaying the moment when I had to see things clearly. And seeing things clearly is hard. It requires a kind of moral courage that I don't think gets talked about enough. The willingness to look at people you love and say, this is not okay, even when saying it costs you something real. That's the part that takes real character. Not the revenge, not the phone call where I finally said what needed to be said, but the quiet decision, made alone, to stop pretending. To stop sending the money not out of spite, but out of self-respect. To understand that generosity given out of fear of being unloved is not generosity at all. It's just a transaction dressed up in family language. What got me through it was Declan. Not because he fixed anything. He didn't. He held my hand in a hospital room at 11:30 at night and didn't say, "I told you so," which was the kind of steadiness I didn't know I needed until I had it. And Ren, pressing her lips to my bandage and saying she'd kiss it better. There's a kind of clear-eyed wisdom in children that adults spend years trying to recover. She didn't ask why my parents hadn't come. She just saw a hurt that needed tending, and she tended it. I think about what I want her to learn from watching me navigate this. I hope she learns that you can love people and still hold a boundary, that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's the foundation that makes it possible to take care of anyone else. That real strength isn't the ability to absorb whatever comes at you without breaking. It's knowing when something has gone on long enough and having the clarity and the backbone to say so. Some doors, I said at the end of all this, don't close all at once. They just stop opening as wide. I still believe that. I'm not done with my family. But I'm done doling my life around the hope that they'll one day become who I needed them to be. That hope kept me small for a long time. Letting it go, quietly, on a Sunday morning at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a spreadsheet, and my husband sitting across from me, that was the bravest thing I've done in years.